Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan and I are both on vacation right now, and Ed Rayburn is retired, but that doesn't mean that we still can't share some great information for you. Check out this interview from back in the dark years of 2020. We have had a pretty dry summer this year, and so we have our forage specialist, Ed Rayburn, joining us today to discuss what steps you can take to help make sure that you don't have a long-term decline in your pasture fields and your hay fields as a result of the drought this summer. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm really happy to have you here because we've had a pretty rough summer. We started off super wet and then we got really dry, and we're getting kind of late in the year, and I wanted to talk a little bit about pasture management and maybe some steps on what farmers can be doing to make sure that they have the best pasture that they can with the weather that we're having. So tell us, what should farmers be doing right now? It's the end of September, or starting to see some frost in some places in West Virginia. What steps can farmers take this late in the game?
Well, it is late in the game. And before we get into the problems that people are having, I think we need to review good management practices. And the reason I'd like to start there is that we've got to keep the good management practices in the back of our mind, especially as we move forward.
Very true.
We have a lot of good farmers out there that are doing a great job managing their pastures, that are implementing good management practices. I'm proud of them and grateful for them. Granted, when we get thrown a curveball like we have for the last few years, we've got to learn to adapt to the changes in climate. And the best guidelines that I have are what we've put on our West Virginia pasture stick. I know you have one, Karen, and any of the folks that have been to the Appalachian Grazing Conference in the last 2 times have the newest pasture stick. But in my literally 40-some years of experience and research, I don't think we can improve on these general recommends for the pasture types that we have here in West Virginia. And those recommends are under rotational grazing, and let's talk rotational grazing first. We should be letting our pastures regrow to 8 to 12 inches in height before we turn the cattle in. Then we want to have those cattle graze those pastures down to somewhere between 2 and 4 inches within 7 days or less, and then move them on to a new paddock. And that is a good summary of what the grass and the cows want out of a pasture.
So you pretty much have to manage the number of cattle that are in the size of the field. So balancing those out to get that 7-day switchover?
Yes, the number of cattle you have and the size of the paddock. That's exactly right. And there's some rules of thumb that we can give on that. But for our discussion today, I think it's important to remember these heights. We have to have enough regrowth interval, rest interval, we would call it, to let that pasture get back to 8 to 12 inches. And then grazing it down to that 2 to 4 inches. Now, we want to tie that height that we're grazing it down to the weather. In the heat of the summer, we don't want to go to a 2-inch height, because that's going to allow the soil to heat up and have an adverse impact to our cool season grasses. The other thing to keep in mind is the cattle don't want to graze down below a 4-inch. So if you're trying to get the most growth on your cattle, and let's think stocker cattle for a minute. With stocker cattle, I've got to get as much gain on them as I can. And so for stocker cattle, I really don't want to go below a 4-inch height, because I'm going to depress average daily gain. Now, for a dry beef cow in the fall, what I have done over the years, I'll wean the calves put the cows back onto a pasture that's been grazed off somewhat, because I want them to be under a little nutritional stress, I'll call it. I want to dry the cows off, so I'd like to have them on a short pasture so they dry off quicker. And I'll put the calves out on the good pasture for 6 weeks of the preconditioning period. And on those calves, I'll try to graze it from a 10 to 12 inch height down to a 6-inch height. When I market the calves there in October, then I'll bring the cows back through those pastures and let them clean up what the calves haven't eaten.
So you purposefully let the calves pick the tops off, and then you send the cows back in afterwards.
Right, right. And by the time you think about it, we preconditioned calves for 6 weeks. And so a lot of those pastures that were originally grazed down by the calves lightly, they're back to 8 to 10 inches, 12 inches tall by the time the cows get in there. So I'm saying we want to pick and manage the pasture for the goals that we're trying to set, or that we have set. And so
Right.
for that calf that's getting ready to go to market, I'm going to baby that calf, make sure that the calf has plenty of lush pasture. Now, when we're preconditioning calves, they're also getting some grain. So I do also make sure that they have dry hay out there, because some of that fall pasture can be so lush that it goes through them just like spring pasture, and they're not actually able to digest it as well as they should. And we're getting that right now in Preston County. No, to get the most out of that lush pasture, I need to give a little dry hay to slow down that rate of passage. So the main thing I wanted to emphasize is enough rest to let that grass come back to 8 to 12 inches tall. And when we're measuring that height, we're measuring orchard grass and fescue. Now, if you have bluegrass in there or bent grass, now it's only going to be down around 5 to 6 inches tall, when the tall fescue is up there around 10 inches tall. So we do have to make a distinction between what type of grass we have out there. Then we do want to graze it down depending on the weather and the animal type. No, but the key is, don't leave the cattle on a field for more than 7 days. Some people will say 6. I use 7 days because most people run on a 7-day cycle. 3 days is better than 7 days, but each farmer has to determine how much time do they have to either build permanent fence or use temporary fence. So that's a personal decision that has to be made. But in terms of grass and animal performance, I do feel the 7-day is the max on a practical basis.
Okay, so you can move, you want to move them at least every 7 days, but if you want to move them as often as every day, that's fine, but no more than 7 days is the goal.
Yes. From my experience and observation, once you get out to 14 days, 10 to 14 days, you get major regrazing. And it doesn't take a scientific experiment to see what you're doing to the pasture. The cows are going to be grazing in one spot and leaving part of the pasture totally left alone. So
So you'll get a little bit more cherry picking at
a
that
lot
point,
more.
where they're going to take the plants they want and not eat the plants you want them to
Right.
eat. So you could increase your weed encroachment at that point as well.
Well, it could be weeds. I'm thinking about it just from the species I want. If you get that patch grazing and do it enough, it can take you 2 to 3 years to get those patches recovered. That sounds maybe ridiculous, and I thought it was ridiculous until I tried it and saw it. Okay.
Learn through experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so that's under continuous grazing. Remember, 8 to 10 inches tall, grazing it down to 2 to 4, depending on the climate and the weather. Under continuous grazing, that's a lot more difficult. But from an animal performance side, you need to keep your pastures at a 4-inch height if you're trying to get the most performance out of your cattle. If you go below a 4-inch height, you're going to start impacting animal performance. And you actually hurt animal performance before you hurt grass growth. That was shown over a period of years at Morgantown on the research plots conducted by Bill Bryan and Ed Prigge. And that was surprising to me. They grazed some of those pastures really short, but it didn't impact forage growth as much as it impacted animal growth, be it the calf or a growing steer. So keep in mind, you're hurting your animal first. Now, where you do hurt the pastures, you will change the species composition in the pasture. If I graze a pasture too tight, you're going to hurt your orchard grass and your fescue. You'll stimulate your bluegrass and your bent grass. A lot of people don't even know what bent grass is. It's the plant we call bluegrass, but it's not bluegrass out there. We have about as much of that as we do bluegrass. So you're going to change the species composition. And now if you get hot, dry weather, it's going to really come back to bite you, because grazing any of those grasses real short, you end up having shorter roots, and you're going to have less available water in dry weather.
So you can really, really impact your cool season grasses by overgrazing in a hot, dry summer.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make. So that's why I say don't graze it short in the hot, dry weather. Try to leave that 4-inch residue to get the shading of the soil, keep the soil a little drier. The other thing that happens, go out there and walk in those 4-inch pastures in the morning. And even though it's hot and dry, you'll see a lot of times there's dew on that grass. So that's actually beneficial.
So basically what you're doing is you're raising the microclimate that exists underneath the grass, and you're creating a larger buffer for that moisture evaporation that's coming up out of the soil and allowing it to catch on the leaves more and bring it back down into the plant.
Exactly. And you're actually capturing moisture out of the air when that dew falls. So
Right.
you're actually getting it's a slight rain that accumulated. And
Hey, we'll take what we can get some
well,
days.
and this may sound ridiculous, but here in Preston County, that dew will last on the grass until 11 o'clock in the morning. And if I have dew on the grass in dry weather, that's saying that that's moisture the plant doesn't have to take out of the soil. So this may sound theoretical and picky, but it's a real world benefit you're providing your grass. And even here in a humid climate, when we have dry weather, it's a benefit. So keep that in mind. If you run short of pasture during a drought, feed some hay. You're better off feeding hay in August and taking care of your pasture so that when you do get rain, that pasture is going to bounce back for you. When you feed hay where you need the fertility. And this comes back into best management practices. You need to be soil testing your pastures and hayfields roughly every 3 years, just so you know what is the fertility status there. I'm not saying run out and buy fertilizer every year, but I'm saying have the information so you know where to feed hay when you have to feed hay, be it during the summer and a drought or during the wintertime. A lot of folks don't realize, if you think capital investment, you think of your barn, your tractor. Well, your cow-calf pair is recycling around $400 worth of fertilizer every year. So if you have a 25 cow herd, that's $10,000 worth of fertilizer those cows are recycling. It's
Wow.
not little money.
Not at
It's
all.
roughly a third to a half of the value of your calf crop. So that's why we want to know what is the fertility in the different parts of the farm. We are going to feed hay, but I've been laughed at for feeding hay in August, but that allowed my pasture to recover when the rain came in September and October, and I was grazing in December and January because I fed some hay in August. So that's the principle. Now, we're going to follow those grazing guidelines, but if I run out of pasture, which does happen in a real drought, I'm going to feed hay where I can get the benefit from that fertility of the manure and urine back in the soil. So in the ideal world, we'd like to keep our pH above 6, for our grass clover pastures, and our P and the K in the optimum range. And if you keep your pH above 6 and your P and K in the optimum range, legumes are going to provide you all the nitrogen you need. They're going to make somewhere between 150 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So if you're willing to do the management, the legumes will provide nitrogen. It's worth $75 an acre to let the legumes make the nitrogen.
Yeah, and that can add up over 100 acres or so.
It adds up quick.
So if the cattle are in there on a continuous grazing session, then would you see a decrease in those legumes? Would they kind of cherry pick those out?
If it's red clover and alfalfa, the answer is yes. If it's white clover, no.
Because it grows a little bit lower to the ground?
Well, right. And actually, folks that overgraze their pasture, I've seen this several times. They overgraze the pasture. They had good fertility, but they're overgrazing it during a drought. Then the rain comes back and cool weather, and the grasses and the clover take off. And they actually have bloat from the white clover because they hit the orchard grass and the fescue so hard, and the white clover was able to spread in there and then take off when it got good weather, and they didn't have enough grass there to prevent the bloat. Excess white clover is actually a good indicator of overgrazing on soil that's decent in fertility. Now, if it's really poor in fertility, you won't have the white clover.
Right. Then you have other problems you have to deal with, though.
Right. But yes, if you're trying to grow red clover, and especially if you do want red clover if you have toxic tall fescue. With the toxic tall fescue, Kentucky 31 tall fescue, red clover is the antidote to the toxins that are in that toxic tall fescue. So that's where I'd like to have about 15-25% red clover in the stand. Now, if you get real excessive in red clover, you have other issues. So the research out of Kentucky says that roughly 15% red clover is the ideal spot for red clover in a toxic tall fescue stand.
So let's say that there was a little bit of overgrazing that happened this summer. What steps would you say that a farmer should be trying to take as fall is going into full swing?
Now, we're going to try to do the best management all the time. But
Right.
like we said, sometimes Mother Nature throws us a curveball and we can't do what we wanted to do. And so now we have to think about how do we fix the problem. And the place to start, get off your four-wheeler and walk your pasture. There's an old saying, the best fertilizer is the farmer's footprints in the field. And there's a lot of truth to that. You need to walk your field. What you're going to look for is how tightly did the cattle graze the pasture? How tall is it? Did I graze it down to 1 inch? Is it 2 inches? Is it 4 inches?
And this is where your pasture stick can come in handy.
That's right, exactly. So we're going to look at plant height, ground cover, or the other side is the lack of ground cover. Do I have bare spots? And are they truly bare spots with no grass or forbs or clover? Or is there something growing there? Now, I'm going to use a term I'm trying to get away from, and that's broadleaf weeds. These broadleaf plants, most of them are not weeds. They're forage that just is not appreciated. And some of them, like dandelion and especially narrow-leaf plantain, are very good forages. And so if you have narrow-leaf plantain, please don't look at it as a weed. It's got the quality of clover in terms of protein and digestibility, but it also is carrying zinc and copper, which our clover and grasses are deficient in. The other things that these plants are doing is they're actually bringing up, think of dandelion. They have that strong taproot. They're going down there and bringing up nutrients from lower down in the soil, feeding it to the cow, and the cow is putting it up on the top part of the soil. Well, dandelions are helping loosen up the soil with that taproot. plantains are doing the same. They seem to dominate on some of our more compacted areas and seem to be helping break up that soil compaction for us.
Yeah. I use them as an indicator species too, so to tell me how compact the soil is in a lot of cases.
Yes, they are an indicator species. I don't talk about them that way. I talk about them from the standpoint of the ecology. These are the ones that tolerate that compaction and do well. That's why they're the indicator species. But they're doing a job for us in terms of loosening that soil and providing the animals good trace minerals.
Right.
So these are the things we're looking for. Now, if you have, I'm picking some numbers. Again, these are just Ed Rayburn's numbers. If I have bare spots that are less than 4 to 6 inches, that's not a big problem. Now, if I have bare spots that are greater than 6 or 8 inches, now I'm starting to get into some issues here. But now it comes back to what type of forage do I have out there? Again, this is plant biology, but what plants do I have out there that are good spreaders? Tall fescue, bluegrass, smooth brome grass, reed canary grass, and quackgrass are good spreaders, especially smooth brome, quackgrass, and bluegrass. They can definitely go in and take over a 4 to 6 inch spot, even fescue. If I have fescue on both sides of a 4 inch spot, fescue will fill that in 12 months. Now, one good grazing season, fescue will fill that in. White clover is going to come in there, and it loves those 4 to 6 inch spots. White clover will even take over that 6 to 8 inch spot. That's where we are using white clover as an indicator of overgrazing. We get too many of those 6 to 8 inch spots, and it's all full of white clover. So now, what type of grass do I have out there? On your pastures, it's going to probably be more fescue, bluegrass, orchard grass, white clover. I know up your way, there's a lot of smooth brome grass in some of the hayfield areas and roadsides. I've seen that. Been
Yeah.
quite impressed with it. Uh,
Although there are some farmers that still think it's a weed, so
Sorry. uh, Smooth brome grass is a great hay grass and does well in aftermath grazing and tolerates drought better than any of the other grasses.
and it's pretty nutritious too, right?
Oh, it is. If you're cutting late cut hay, it makes the best late cut hay out there. So to me, smooth brome grass is a jewel of a grass. I would not want to look at it as a weed. If you have smooth brome grass and tall fescue in the same field, it's the one grass, if I manage it as a hay crop, that can smother out toxic tall fescue. But that's discussion for a different day.
Right, right.
Let's get away from thinking of a lot of these things as weeds. Smooth brome grass is not a weed. Narrow leaf plantain and dandelion are not weeds. These are plants that we've been given, and we need to use them to our advantage, and they're money in the bank if we use them properly. Now, getting back to renovation. If we have these small spots, that's not a big deal. Normally, I don't push nitrogen, but this is a place where we might want to think about a little nitrogen because if I'm trying to stimulate grasses to fill in these small openings, 50 to 60 pounds of nitrogen in October is going to stimulate those cool season grasses to produce tillers. Most tiller buds are formed in the fall. No, that fall fertilization, late September, early October, 50 to 60 pounds of N, but keep the cattle off of it because I'm trying to grow grass and grow grass tillers. Now, that doesn't
Right.
mean I can't graze it in December or January, okay?
But you wanna let it get up to its 8 to 12 inches before you start grazing it again, right?
This late in the season, it may not make 8 to 12 inches. It may make 4 to 6. So if it only makes 4 to 6, yes, you can do a light grazing. Light grazing can be beneficial because if you have too much grass going into winter and you have a heavy, wet snowfall with these grasses that mat down, you can actually get fungal infections, what we
Right.
call snow mold. No, we haven't had
Hmm.
enough snow in the last year or two to have snow mold.
No.
uh, they are calling for a lot of snow this winter because of the El Nino effect. I don't know if it's going to happen, but something to keep in mind.
Prepare for the worst and hope for the best, right?
Exactly. So if I'm trying to develop tillers, that fall nitrogen, keep the cattle off. If you get a lot of growth, yes, no, graze some of it off, so we don't have snow mold that's going to come back and kill the plants that we just did a great job of growing. We would like to winter that grass. Some folks say 4 inches, and if you're looking at just tall fescue, 4 inches isn't bad. If we've got a lot of the bluegrass and bent grass, 4 inches is probably a little tall. Probably 2 to 3 inches is better, especially if I have a lot of tillers out there. One thing folks don't recognize is tall fescue and orchard grass don't like long rest periods and a lot of accumulation. If you want to thin a tall fescue stand, let it grow from the 1st of July to December and throw 50 to 100 pounds of N out there in end of June, and you're only going to have a 50% stand of tall fescue come December. Now, that's not bad if you want a frost seed clover in it. Okay,
Right.
that's actually good.
Okay. Okay.
Or if you had that smooth brome grass in the field, the smooth brome grass is going to take off if you did that. That's how you get smooth brome grass to kill out tall fescue, is long rest periods, because smooth brome likes a long rest period, likes high nitrogen. Fescue does not like a long rest period. Uh,
So if you're trying to get more cattle on a smaller pasture and you're rotating them more frequently, then your tall fescue is going to be happier.
yes, and that will kill your smooth brome grass.
Gotcha.
Now, these big spots, that's not all bad if you want a frost seed, because those big bare spots are the best places to get frost heaving. Most of the frost heaving comes in December and late January and February, because right in the coldest part of the winter, it may stay so cold that you don't get the actual heaving, and that's what we want to get. Daytime temperatures around 40, nighttime temperature around 20. And you go out there first of the, right at sunrise, and you're going to see those big ice crystals sticking out of the soil, especially in those bare spots. And that's what incorporates that seed into the soil.
So how early should someone get out there and put some seed down?
Sometime after the 15th
So
of
definitely
January.
March is too late.
Yeah, March is too late unless you bring the cattle in to walk the seed into the soil. So if we're doing just a frost seeding, I'd like to do it. I don't want to do it in the December frost. And the reason for that is you may get some good incorporation, but if I get a nice warm spell, those seed may germinate, and then I get another cold spell and they get
Right.
killed. That last part of January is the coldest part of the winter on average. Okay. And so if I wait until I get that frost heaving in late January, February, depending on exactly where you are, that's going to be the safest time to do it. If you wait until March, you probably have missed the best frost heaving. And I think a lot of folks do that, is wait too long to get that seed out there. Uh, if things are really bad and you want to look at no-till, we're basically the end of September. The only thing I would no-till drill, at this point in time, would be annual ryegrass. If you can't get annual ryegrass seed, I would consider perennial. But a mixture of annual ryegrass and cereal rye would be good in terms of getting cover and some growth. And they would also give you feed in the spring. If you wanted any feed this fall, you could put oats in there, but I think it's almost too
So now
late for
how
that.
late would someone be able to put some rye out there if they could get annual rye?
Obviously, the later you do it, the less you're going to get this fall. and maybe even next spring. But as long as you get the annual ryegrass seed in the top 1/4 inch, no more than a 1/2 inch, if you get warm weather, it will take off. I would say after the middle of October, you may be wasting your time and effort, and you might be better off just waiting and doing the frost seeding.
Okay. Okay.
You want to get good seed, get good certified seed of whatever you get. And it's going to cost you a little bit more, but if certified seed will pay off the first year in terms of the better quality yield and also disease. If you don't get certified grass seed, a lot of times you're going to run into varieties that are not resistant to rust, that red fungus that gets on the grass in the fall.
So go for certified seed. What about inoculated seed?
Inoculated seed for the clovers is good because it does carry the bacteria that clover needs. And most of the good quality clover seed is coming pre-inoculated and pelleted. Pelleted seed is actually a little bit easier to broadcast because it has that coating on it. You do have to make sure you have your seeder properly adjusted. If it's white clover, you only need 1 to 2 pounds of pure live seed per acre to get a good stand. If it's red clover, pelleted seed, again, look at how much of that seed is coating. But if I had 4 pounds of red clover and 1 pound of white clover in a frost seeding, that's going to give you a real good seeding and good stand next spring.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.